This video is going to be a little different than the usual ones. It's a direct sequel of sorts to the living room gaming PC video I did a while ago. I've been using this PC/console contraption for the past couple of months now and have since learned and tweaked a few more things. Most of which I learned through the numerous and very helpful comments that have been provided by all of you. There were also quite a few questions, so I thought this might be a good opportunity to compile all that information into a handy little video. This handy little video to be precise. So first, thanks to everyone who added their tips and pointers, I really appreciate it. There's a total of 5 chapters, and I'll be going through these in the order that I think is the most pressing, based on the amount of comments I received on that particular subject. And filtered through the amazing AI technology that is my gut feeling, also known as awesome intestines. A tiny little disclaimer though, this video still won't be covering Playnite and other launchers, those will follow at a later date. For now, let's patch up the existing Windows 11 machine and see how that experience can be further improved upon. There's no fancy hardware this time around, so let's skip the intro and go straight to the first point. Let's quickly recap HDMI CEC before we get to the high refresh rate and HDR limitations my first solution introduced and that many of you have pointed out. Most HDMI devices these days have something called CEC, or Consumer Electronics Control, which allows them to talk to each other. For example, when you turn on a PS5, it'll also turn on the TV or the AV receiver if present along with it. Unfortunately, no modern GPU has CEC built in, so this feature requires additional hardware. I opted for an adapter by a company called Pulsate, which you place in between your source and destination device. You can then use the USB connection to the adapter to manually send CEC commands and achieve the same results, thus turning on the TV and AV receiver whenever the PC turns on as well. However, due to the HDMI 2.A and B limitations of this adapter, I was missing out on the mentioned high refresh rate and HDR. There are 2 alternative solutions I would like to highlight before getting to the one that I ended up with. The first one is a motherboard, or to be more precise, one with a built-in HDMI port that does support CEC. There are apparently quite a few out there, although I found it a bit hard to find that information on the spec sheet. Or use a costlier but much more capable adapter from HD Fury that will allow for more modern HDMI features like the high refresh rate and HDR we are looking for. I feel a bit embarrassed on the solution I ended up with though, because I can't believe I didn't think of it myself, and it's to simply use a second HDMI cable. Meaning there's one just for the CEC communication coming out of the adapter and one for the actual audio-video signal coming out of the GPU. This is possible because it doesn't matter where the commands are coming from as long as they specify which sources the TV and AV receiver need to switch to. Of course, this requires at least 2 free HDMI in ports on your destination device. In my case, that is the AV receiver, which luckily had enough now that both the Series X and PS5 have been shelved for the time being. If you're setting this up for the first time and are curious about the whole process and finding the right CEC commands, check my previous video on this where I explain everything in more detail. There are 2 additional things I did though. In my original video, I had Windows Task Scheduler automatically run the HDMI CEC commands whenever the PC awoke from sleep, so it would switch to it. I simply told it to run a command line file, and in there I had a 10-second delay between the power on command and the switch input sources command. I reduced that to 5 seconds as the longer delay turned out to be unnecessary and overly cautious. Secondly, I'm now hiding the terminal pop-up, which can easily be done by checking the Run whether user is logged on or not option in the General tab under the Security Options section within Windows Task Scheduler. Before that, every time I would switch to the PC, I had to either wait until the command line window disappeared by itself or Alt-tab into the game or Steam's Big Picture mode. But the bee's knees was and is that this unlocks the refresh rate to its full potential. For me and my senior TV, this doesn't change anything because it caps out at 60Hz anyway, but should make those happy with newer models. Besides the refresh rate though, I'm now also capable of using HDR, which brings me neatly to the next chapter. I completely ignored HDR in my first video. I had my eyes set on my laziness goal to keep my behind planted on the cushions no matter the cost. But with the dedicated video signal, I no longer need to pay that price and can leverage the full contrast of my TV and games that support it, as well as those that do not, but we'll get to that in a second. If you have both an HDR-capable TV and GPU, you can activate it in the Windows 11 display settings. You can also enable HDR for video streaming, but make sure to uncheck Auto HDR if you're using an Nvidia card. I'll talk more about this later. Then I would advise to install the Windows HDR calibration app from the Windows App Store. If you ever played around with HDR on Windows and immediately turned it off because it looked horrible, this might fix that issue. It's pretty straightforward, and if you ever set up HDR in a game, you know the drill, as it's pretty much the same. After having done that, you're all set. Congratulations, HDR is back. But what about those games that don't have native HDR support? Well, this is where the power of PC gaming starts to flex its muscles. There are a few options on how to do this. One is auto HDR we saw in the display settings just a second ago. The other, arguably better way is to use Nvidia's HDR remix feature. In a nutshell, this will automatically convert SDR content into HDR1. There's a great guide I found on Reddit on how to set this up. It's a bit older but offers context to some of the settings and is well worth a quick read through. But if your hardware supports it, you should be able to turn it on straight away in the global settings of the Nvidia Experience app. There's even more you can configure in the Control Panels app, but I'll leave that for another day. This technically also goes beyond gaming, as it will convert SDR videos into HDR ones, meaning if you watch older movies with your PC, this might breathe new life into them as well. But I think that's getting dangerously close to an entirely new rabbit hole. To me, HDR is a tricky subject anyway, riddled with personal preferences and seemingly endless ways to tweak it. For my peanut-sized brain, the Windows calibration along with the automatic conversion from Nvidia seem to give me good enough results for now and complies with my ambition of doing just a little more but not too much. After all, I want to spend what little time I have in between my day job and making these videos playing games, not endlessly tweaking them, even if that is sometimes just as fun. However, there's one big asterisk on this whole Nvidia remix situation, and it's performance. It can take a pretty big hit, 10 to 20% of your FPS, or so I've read. I didn't test this myself, but thought I should mention it. Luckily, you will most likely do this for older titles, those that don't have native HDR support, which tend to be less demanding, hopefully. But there's also another option, one which I've read very positive things about, one that performance-wise eats Nvidia's HDR remix for breakfast, called Special K.
K is for breakfast. Kellogg's Special K.
No, not the cereal of the same name, but something referred to as the Swiss Army knife of PC gaming, that besides HDR injection contains numerous other improvements for making games just a little better than they already are. As a YouTube channel that calls its home to Switzerland, I feel strangely attached to Special K. Although this channel is far from being a Swiss Army knife, there are too many holes in my plot, aka theses, making Swiss cheese a much more appropriate label. But if you truly want to maximize your gaming experience, I'd highly encourage you to check out Special K. Remember, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and so is tweaking gaming experiences. To once again recap, the idea in the previous video was to be able to turn the PC on via the controller. In the end, I figured out that some controllers combined with a 2.4 GHz dongle managed to wake the PC from sleep just like any other peripherals. But I couldn't figure out how to boot it from a completely off state. As per usual though, there are alternatives. For example, if you have an LG TV, there's technically a way to boot it via Wake on LAN. You can also get a little remote that plugs into your motherboard headers from Silverstone that basically acts like the power buttons on your case, but as a remote, which is super cool. I'm sticking to the controller though, just for convenience sake. Being forced to using sleep also has its benefits. For example, I can pick up a game exactly from where I left it off without having to go through the entire launch and loading procedure. But it seems this feature is limited to fewer controllers than I had thought, as many of you have reported failed attempts with the 8-bit Duo Ultimate. I can only vouch for the 2.4 GHz adapter that'll work with the original Xbox One or Series controllers, as well as Razer's Wolverine V3 Pro, which I've been personally using. However, I did run into a strange situation with said controller at some point, one that I did manage to fix, so maybe the following trick might work for someone else out there. During the last firmware update of the Wolverine, which was an entire ordeal by itself that I won't get into, Razer did ask to switch the controller to the Xbox mode first before updating it. After the update, the controller suddenly didn't wake the PC anymore. I checked the wake privileges and everything else I did in my previous video, but I still could not figure out why it suddenly started to misbehave. Until I accidentally switched back to the PC mode on the controller, and then it suddenly worked again. Now, I can't guarantee this will fix the issue for anyone else, but in case it does not work for you and you do use a controller with a 2.4 GHz dongle, and make sure it is not Bluetooth, there are many of those as well, check if yours has different modes too, and if so, if it is set to PC, not Xbox. The only other controller I have is my travel gamepad, the SN30, which is from 8-bit Duo as well, but Bluetooth only. However, here too there are modes on the back for different platforms. Again, I can't guarantee this will work, but I think it's worth a shot, so good luck out there. Now, for those of you who want to use a DualSense controller instead, I unfortunately couldn't figure out a way to wake the PC with it, at least not one that didn't involve some crazy Bluetooth contraption. However, there are other benefits the DualSense brings that might still make it interesting, mainly the touch panel and how it can be used as a mouse pointer. Yeah, that's pretty darn cool and is very tempting to use to get past those pesky game launchers and other potential pop-ups, which I'm going to talk about in the next chapter. In order to get the touchpad working though, you have to get an app within Steam called DualSense X or DSX. It's not free, but if you are a dedicated DS user on PC, I'd say it's well worth a try. There's truly a staggering amount of configurations you can do here. Apart from enabling the touchpad as a mouse replacement, you can also set up individual profiles. Configure the RGB lighting to be either pure flash or actually useful as a battery indicator or controller number and even more. You can adjust the trigger point of your triggers, dead zones for the sticks and even add rumble profiles. This is indeed pretty amazing and borderlines on pro controller features. Anyway, the only feature missing at the moment is motion control, but that is supposedly coming in the future too. But what if you're a diehard Xbox fan, or if you're like me, already sprung for a dedicated PC controller and want to keep the Wake benefits? Well, fear not, there's an app for that as well called Controller Companion, one with a smaller price tag and far fewer features, but it might be just about perfect for my use case. Controller Companion basically activates itself as soon as you leave Steam's Big Picture mode, upon which the left stick turns into your mouse pointer, the right into your scroll wheel and the A and X button into your left and right mouse click, respectively. You can even launch a really freaky looking keyboard with a click on the left stick. Pretty neat. The right trigger will change between lower and higher keys, and the start button acts as your enter key. For my use case, this is perfect. It's just enough to click away those network permission screens Windows throws at you after a new game install or the previously mentioned launchers. There are also dedicated settings where I would recommend you set it to auto launch on start. This way it's a set it and forget it situation. The only issue I had with it is that it stops working as soon as something enters full screen, so it's not entirely triggered by Steam leaving Big Picture mode and more so by any application entering or leaving full screen. Controller Companion isn't exclusive to Xbox controllers either, it worked just as fine with the DualSense and will probably work with any other controller as well. It's been a little while since the last update, but I hope it will continue to work in the future. I want to end this chapter with one last shortcut I never knew existed. If you're using Steam and hit the logo button and start on your controller, you can sort of tap through active applications. It's not as smooth as the real Alt tab, but this comes in very handy after waking the PC from sleep, as Windows would often get confused as to what should be in the foreground. A simple tap back into the game has always solved this issue for me. You could theoretically also keep other apps such as Netflix or even a browser open as well. Combined with Controller Companion or the DualSense's touchpad, you can now sort of do other things from the comfort of your couch. But let's not get too excited, as we are going to talk about one of modern gaming's biggest annoyances: game launchers. This is going to be a pretty short chapter, not because it's easy, but because there's unfortunately not that much that you can do about it, at least not on Windows. We all know this scenario. You sit down, crack open a cold one, and you're ready to put reality behind you for a couple of hours. Bam! Here comes Rockstar smacking you right in the face. So what can you do about it? Well, for certain games such as Baldur's Gate 3, you can go to the game's properties in Steam, then stay on General and add the parameter Skip Launcher into the Launch Options field. That's it. It was almost too easy, right? But unfortunately it doesn't work for every game, so what are the other options then? Well, I found that the best way to solve this is to try to find a solution on a per game basis. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it takes a bit more effort and also takes away something you might need. For example, Red Dead Redemption 2, which I finally started, has a way too to get rid of the Rockstar launcher, but it also kills cloud saves, which is a big no-no for me. One of the primary reasons for me to play on the PC is that I now have the ability to take my games with me wherever I go, so cloud saves are a must-have. Again, it's best to search individually on how to get rid of the launchers, but some games like Red Dead 2 will launch just fine without additional interaction after the first time. And thanks to apps like Controller Companion or DSX, I don't think this is as big of an issue anymore, at least not for me. It's still annoying, don't get me wrong, but it's bearable, which is something that can't be said about this video. However, fear not, you have reached the final chapter. Much like the HDR topic, surround sound is a tricky subject which I don't feel fully comfortable talking about, mostly due to a lack of proper understanding on how it truly works. Basic surround sound should work out of the box though. I was able to get my speakers vibrating in supported games straight away. My Onkyo RZ50 immediately recognized the source signal as multiple channels and properly converted it to my 3.1.2 setup, meaning left, center, right, one sub and 2 Atmos up-firing speakers. But what about those Atmos speakers, or Atmos in general? Well, it's as simple as downloading an app again, this time from the Windows App Store, called Dolby Access. In here you simply have to enable it for a home theater setup. You can also tell it to mix up stereo or non-Atmos sources, and after that it's best to check the Windows audio settings just to make sure that it's active. If you then go back into a supported game, Atmos should automatically be working. For my tests, I used Diablo 4, which worked wonderfully in tandem with my Onkyo, displaying the red crest of success. Double checking the input signal confirmed it too, and that's pretty much it. If you're interested, I linked a list of games that supposedly have Atmos on PC in case you want to try this out with more titles. With this, we've reached the end. These were the things that I learned since I made my last video, and I hope there was something in here that you could take away as well, upping your living room gaming PC just a little bit. If you are interested in how I set this up initially, check out my previous video on this topic, as well as the build video of my PC. Both of the videos are linked down below, along with more information on many of the things that I talked about today. I'm looking forward to reading the comments again on this one. I learned a lot last time, so once again, thank you a lot for that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon in the next one, where it's back to keyboards, but just a little different. Bye!